Look, sometimes you try to help your family and everything just spirals completely out of control. I need to get this off my chest because what happened with Harvey and the whole money situation has been eating at me for weeks now. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you're enjoying this story, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I really appreciate the support. So I'm Riley. I'm 32, and until recently I was engaged to this guy, Harvey, who's 34. Harvey's an architect, one of those obsessive control freaks who color codes everything and treats every decision like it's going to determine the fate of humanity. The man literally has spreadsheets for his spreadsheets, and he makes decent money, but acts like every dollar is sacred or something. When we got engaged, Harvey immediately started his whole financial responsibility lecture talking about budgets and realistic expectations instead of, actually being romantic about our future together. He opened this joint savings account and deposited $35,000 of his precious money, then handed me the debit card like he was doing me some huge favor. "You handle the beautiful parts," he said with this condescending smile. "I've got the foundation covered. The beautiful parts, like I was his hired decorator instead of his future wife. But whatever, I took the card because 35 grand was more money than I'd ever had access to at one time, and Harvey went back to his blueprints and his obsessive planning, completely trusting that I'd follow his carefully calculated budget like a good little fiancé. Here's what Harvey's analytical brain couldn't comprehend. My parents, Lane and Natalia, were drowning financially. They'd bought this beautiful house years ago, but Dad had made some bad investment choices, and Mom's hours got cut at her job. They were too proud to ask for help directly, but I could see the stress destroying them. Mom had started shopping at discount stores, clipping coupons, like her life depended on it, and Dad had this defeated expression whenever bills arrived in the mail. Meanwhile, Harvey's sitting there, obsessing over centerpiece options and invitation fonts, like those were the most pressing issues in the universe. He had zero clue what real problems looked like. His biggest worry was whether the caterer could accommodate his weird dietary restrictions. Meanwhile, my parents were probably going to lose their house. It was infuriating watching him stress over napkin colors when my family was facing actual crisis. I started small, just a few hundred here and there for wedding expenses that somehow ended up helping with my parents' grocery bills or utility payments. Harvey never questioned anything because he trusted me completely, which honestly made it almost too easy. He'd ask how the planning was progressing, and I'd show him some vendor emails or fabric samples, and he'd nod approvingly and go back to his precious work projects. The thing about Harvey is he'd always been completely oblivious to anything that didn't fit into his neat little categories. He saw my parents as financially irresponsible because they didn't share his obsessive planning habits. He'd make these subtle comments about people who live beyond their means, without understanding that sometimes life just happens to you. Not everyone gets to be an architect with steady paychecks and family money to fall back on. I remember this dinner where my parents came over and Dad mentioned needing roof repairs. Harvey immediately launched into this lecture about emergency funds and home maintenance budgets, and I watched my father's face just shut down completely. I wanted to throw my wine at Harvey's smug expression, but I smiled and changed the subject because keeping the peace was more important than calling out his arrogance. That's when it hit me. The wedding money could solve everything. Harvey would never even miss it since he had plenty more where that came from. My parents needed help immediately, not after we'd blown a fortune on one day of celebration. It seemed obvious that the money should go where it was actually needed, instead of funding Harvey's perfect wedding fantasy. The withdrawals became routine pretty quickly. Every other day I'd hit different ATMs for the $500 daily limit. It was like this little game. Harvey would leave for work with his coffee and perfectly organized briefcase, and I'd drive around town collecting money for my family. The cash went straight to my parents, though I never told them the source. I'd just show up with money for their mortgage payment or hand Mom cash for groceries, saying I'd gotten a work bonus or found some great deal. Harvey was so wrapped up in his building projects that he barely noticed my daily errands. When he asked about wedding planning, I'd show him the vendor contracts I was collecting, legitimate ones that I fully intended to use once I figured out how to replace the money. I wasn't stealing from him, I was borrowing from our future to save my family's present, which seemed like the right priority to anyone with actual human emotions. The bigger withdrawals required more creativity and planning. I drove across town to branches where nobody knew me and walked up to tellers with confident smiles. "I need to withdraw $10,000 for our wedding vendors," I'd explain, showing my ID and the debit card. Cash only. You know how these small businesses prefer it. The tellers never questioned anything, because why would they? It was my account, my money, my choice how to spend it. That first $10,000 went straight to my parents' mortgage company, and watching Dad's shoulders relax for the first time in months felt incredible. Mom actually smiled during grocery shopping instead of calculating every single item. It felt amazing to be able to fix their problems so easily, while Harvey remained completely clueless about the real impact I was having. The second $10,000 withdrawal was even smoother. By then, I'd perfected the routine. Different branch, same confident approach, same story about wedding vendors needing cash payments. Harvey would come home talking about his latest building project, while I was literally saving my family from financial ruin, with money that meant nothing to him compared to what it meant to them. But then wedding vendors started sending overdue notices, and suddenly my email was full of final notice warnings and threats to cancel our contracts. I'd been so focused on helping my parents that I'd forgotten about the actual wedding expenses piling up. The money was gone, but the bills were very real and getting more aggressive. That's when I realized I needed a bigger solution. The wedding fund was completely tapped out, but my parents still needed substantial help. Dad's business was struggling badly, and Mom's reduced hours were barely covering basic expenses. They needed something significant that would give them breathing room for more than just a month or two. I started researching second mortgages and home equity loans online. My parents' house had appreciated significantly since they'd purchased it, which meant there was definitely equity to tap into. The problem was their credit situation and current income. No legitimate lender was going to approve them for anything substantial, given their financial struggles. But I discovered these subprime lenders who were much more flexible with their requirements. Higher interest rates, sure, but they'd approve loans that traditional banks wouldn't even consider. All they really needed was proof of ownership and signatures on the paperwork. My parents owned their house outright, except for the original mortgage, so there was definitely equity available to access. The plan formed gradually in my mind. I could get the loan approved in their names, use the money to help them stabilize their finances permanently, and eventually pay it back once Harvey and I were married and had combined our resources more officially. It wasn't fraud, it was family helping family in a crisis. My parents would benefit immediately, and I'd handle the repayment logistics later when we had more financial flexibility. Getting the loan paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. These subprime lenders basically throw applications at anyone who shows interest. I filled everything out using my parents' information, their address, approximate income figures, social security numbers from documents I'd helped them with before. I'd been handling some of their bills lately anyway, so I had access to most of what the application required. The challenging part was handling the signatures convincingly. My parents have very distinctive handwriting styles. Dad's got this old-fashioned script from when schools actually taught penmanship properly, and Mom's got these elegant loops that she's always been proud of. I spent hours practicing with old birthday cards and letters as reference materials. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough that a busy loan processor probably wouldn't examine it too carefully. The real stroke of genius was remembering that my cousin Reagan had just become a notary public. She'd been so excited about her new certification, posting pictures of her official stamp on social media and talking about her new side business opportunity. Reagan's always looked up to me. I'm the successful one with the architect fiancé and the nice apartment downtown. She'd do pretty much anything I asked without questioning the details too much. I called Reagan and explained that my parents needed some refinancing documents notarized, but they were both working during business hours and couldn't get to a notary office. Could she possibly come by their house and take care of it? I'd pay her standard fee, of course, and maybe we could grab lunch afterward to catch up properly. Reagan was absolutely thrilled to help out family. She showed up at my parents' house while they were both at work, official stamp in hand, and ready to do her cousin a favor. I had the loan documents prepared with the signatures already completed. They had to run to an important appointment, I explained casually, but they signed everything before leaving. They just need the notary stamp to make it all official. Reagan barely glanced at the signatures because she was too busy being proud of her new responsibility and chatting about her boyfriend and her job situation. She stamped the documents, filled in her information sections, and handed everything back to me with a satisfied smile. "Tell Uncle Lane and Aunt Natalia I said hello," she said while packing up her stamp and materials. Just like that, I had $40,000 in approved loan funds. The money hit the temporary account I'd established within a week of submitting everything. $40,000 that could solve my parents' problems permanently and give me enough left over to handle the wedding expenses that Harvey was starting to ask more questions about. I used most of it exactly as I'd planned. Paying off my parents' credit card debts, completely covering their mortgage payments for the next 6 months, and giving them a substantial cash cushion for emergencies and unexpected expenses. They didn't ask where the money came from, because they were just grateful that their financial stress was finally ending. Dad started sleeping through the night again, and Mom went back to buying name-brand groceries without guilt. The remaining money went toward catching up on wedding vendors and covering some of my own accumulated expenses. I'd been putting everything on credit cards while the wedding fund was helping my parents, so I had significant catching up to do myself. It felt incredible to finally have breathing room, instead of constantly juggling payments and due dates like some kind of financial acrobat. Harvey noticed that I seemed more relaxed and less stressed, but he attributed it to wedding planning finally coming together smoothly. "You've been doing such an amazing job with everything," he'd say, completely oblivious to the complex financial juggling act I'd been managing behind the scenes. I knew I could trust you to handle it all perfectly. Everything fell apart on a Tuesday morning when I was still in bed. Harvey came storming into the bedroom with his laptop, his face white with shock, and what looked like genuine rage. He'd gotten an email from our invitation company about a bounced check, and when he'd logged into our joint account to investigate what happened, he discovered the $74.19 that remained of our wedding fund. "Where is it?" he demanded, showing me the bank statement on his screen with shaking hands. $35,000, Riley. Gone. Where did every penny go? I tried playing dumb initially because maybe there was some kind of banking mistake or system error, but Harvey had already downloaded months of detailed transaction history. He'd seen every single withdrawal, every location, every date and timestamp. He'd transformed into some kind of forensic accountant overnight, tracking my movements like I was a common criminal instead of his fiancée. "It was for my parents," I finally admitted, because there was no point in lying when he had all the evidence. "They were going to lose their house, Harvey. You have so much money that this was nothing to you, but it was everything to them. I was helping my family." That's when he completely lost control. Started yelling about trust and betrayal and how I'd stolen from our shared future together, like I was some kind of thief instead of a daughter trying to help her struggling family survive. He kept saying, "our money," like he hadn't been the one making every single financial decision from the very beginning of our relationship. But then he pulled out printed copies of documents I'd hidden in my desk drawer. The loan paperwork, the forged signatures, Reagan's notary stamp. My stomach dropped as I realized he'd been going through my private things, violating my privacy like some kind of detective investigating a crime scene. "This is a felony, Riley," he said, his voice deadly quiet and controlled. "Forgery, fraud. You involved your innocent cousin in committing a serious crime." I tried explaining that it wasn't like that at all. My parents desperately needed help, and I was going to pay everything back eventually. It wasn't fraud, when it was family helping family through a crisis. But Harvey just stared at me like I was a complete stranger he'd never seen before. "You will not breathe a word of this to anyone," I told him, my voice shaking with rage at his judgmental attitude. "Especially not to my family. They wouldn't understand the situation, and you'll destroy them over money that means nothing to you." That's when Harvey showed his true vindictive colors. He stood up, closed his laptop deliberately, and looked at me with this cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. "You think you hold all the cards here," he said quietly, "but you're completely wrong about that." I realized I needed to protect myself from whatever revenge he was planning. Harvey was clearly preparing something vindictive and cruel, and I couldn't let him destroy my family over money that he'd never even miss from his comfortable lifestyle. So I laid out the reality of the situation for him clearly. "You tell anyone about this," I said firmly, "and I will completely burn your life to the ground. I'll tell everyone you hit me during arguments. I'll tell your boss you've been embezzling from client accounts. I'll make sure every single person we know thinks you're an abuser and a criminal. So here's what's going to happen. We're done with this relationship. You pack your things and walk away quietly, and you stay completely away from my family, or I will expose you." Harvey just looked at me for a long, tense moment. Then he said 2 simple words, not a word. He went to our bedroom and started packing methodically. Didn't argue, didn't try to negotiate, didn't attempt to reason with me about anything. just packed his clothes and laptop and toiletries like he was checking out of a hotel room. He left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter and walked out without saying goodbye or looking back. I thought I'd won that confrontation. I thought I'd called his bluff successfully, and he'd realized he couldn't fight me effectively. I had no idea what he was actually planning in that calculating mind of his. Harvey's revenge was swift and surgically precise. 2 days after he moved out of our apartment, my phone started ringing frantically. It was my father, and he sounded panicked in a way I'd never heard before in my entire life. "Riley, what the hell is this email? What is Harvey talking about with these documents?" My heart stopped completely. "What email, Dad? What are you talking about?" He sent us some kind of loan documents and bank statements. Says there's a second mortgage on our house that we never applied for. This has to be a mistake, right? Some kind of elaborate scam. I tried staying calm and thinking of an explanation that would make sense to them. But Dad was already talking to the lender directly, already getting confirmation that, yes, there was definitely a $40,000 loan against their property. And yes, it was currently in default because no payments had been made since the initial disbursement. "To the signatures," Dad said, his voice breaking with confusion and fear. "Riley, these signatures on the documents, they're not ours. Someone forged our names on legal documents." I wanted to explain everything properly. How I'd been trying to help them, how the money had gone directly to pay their bills and save their house from foreclosure. But Dad was spiraling into panic, talking about fraud investigations and criminal charges and how they were going to lose everything they'd worked for. Mom got on the phone, crying hysterically. How could someone do this terrible thing to us? We trusted Harvey completely. We thought he was going to be family. That's when I realized the full scope of what Harvey had done to me. He hadn't just sent them the loan documents. He'd made it look like he was warning them about fraud, like he was the concerned ex-fiancé trying to protect them from some unknown criminal. He'd positioned himself as the hero trying to help, while leaving me to be discovered as the villain who'd betrayed them. I tried calling Harvey repeatedly, but he'd blocked my number completely. I tried going to his office building, but security wouldn't let me up to his floor. He'd cut me off entirely, leaving me to face the consequences alone while he played the innocent victim. The lender was demanding immediate full payment of the $40,000 plus interest and penalties. My parents didn't have that kind of money. They barely had $4,000 in savings. The loan was secured by their house, which meant foreclosure was a very real possibility if they couldn't pay quickly. Dad aged what looked like 10 years in a single week. He stopped eating, regularly stopped sleeping through the night, just sat at the kitchen table staring at the loan documents like he could make them disappear through sheer willpower. Mom cried constantly, asking over and over how this could have happened to their family. They had to hire a lawyer, which cost money they didn't have. The lawyer explained their options, none of which were good. They could report the fraud to police, which would mean pressing charges against their own daughter. They could try to negotiate with the lender, but without the ability to pay foreclosure was inevitable. Or they could sell the house quickly and hope to cover both mortgages and legal fees. I tried explaining to them that I'd only been trying to help, that the money had gone to pay their bills and keep them afloat. But they were too devastated to listen to explanations. Dad kept asking how I could have done this to them, how I could have destroyed their financial security and involved innocent Reagan in criminal activity. The house went up for sale within a month. The market was decent, but they needed to sell quickly, which meant accepting a lower offer than they'd hoped for. After paying off both mortgages, the fraudulent loan, legal fees, and realtor commissions, they were left with almost nothing. They had to move into a small rental apartment across town, starting over financially in their 60s. Dad's business never recovered from the stress and distraction. Mom had to find a second job to help cover their new expenses. Their retirement savings were gone, their credit was destroyed, and their relationship with me was shattered beyond repair. The worst part was watching how it affected their health. Dad developed high blood pressure and started having chest pains from the stress. Mom lost weight she couldn't afford to lose and started taking medication for anxiety and depression. The people who'd raised me and loved me unconditionally were suffering because of choices I'd made. Reagan got questioned by police as part of the fraud investigation. She was terrified and confused, not understanding how she'd gotten involved in something criminal. The notary board launched their own investigation, and she almost lost her certification. Her trust in me was completely destroyed, and she stopped speaking to our entire side of the family. Meanwhile, Harvey seemed to be thriving. I heard through mutual friends that he moved into a nice new apartment downtown. He was traveling for work, taking on bigger projects, generally living his best life, while my family was falling apart. He'd gotten his revenge and moved on like our entire relationship had meant nothing to him. I lost my job eventually because the stress and drama were affecting my work performance. I couldn't concentrate on anything except the disaster my life had become. I had to move back in with my parents in their tiny rental apartment, sleeping on their couch like a teenager who'd screwed up her life. The legal consequences kept mounting. The district attorney's office was considering pressing charges for forgery and fraud. I had to hire my own lawyer with money I didn't have, going deeper into debt to avoid potential jail time. The stress was eating me alive, but I couldn't see any way out of the mess I'd created. 2 years later, I'm still dealing with the fallout from everything that happened. My parents speak to me, but our relationship will never be the same. They're struggling financially, and probably always will be now. Reagan won't even look at me at family gatherings. Harvey has completely moved on with his life while I'm still picking up the pieces of mine. I know what people think, that I'm some kind of criminal who destroyed her own family for money. But they don't understand the pressure I was under, or how desperate this situation had become. I was trying to help the people I loved most, and it all went wrong in ways I never could have predicted. Harvey got exactly what he wanted, his revenge and his freedom. He proved he was smarter and more ruthless than I'd ever imagined. He destroyed my family and walked away clean while I'm left dealing with the consequences of trying to help the people who needed it most. Maybe I made mistakes, but Harvey's the one who chose to destroy everything instead of trying to understand or forgive. He's the one who decided that his money was more important than my family's survival. He's the one who chose revenge over compassion, and I'll never forgive him for that choice.